Okay, hello. Welcome to another Jenkins X Office hours. We've got there's 14 people on the call here, which is great. We're gonna have a chat from Pete, who's going to share some of the work that's been done around analysing, having a look at the CLI and looking at what refactorings we may need to do to be able to work and improve areas around working on the CLI. We're also going to have some updates from Oscar and Dennis around some exciting work around the Jenkins X website, which hopefully everybody's be as pleased as I am around that as well. As always, if there's any questions, please jump in and share, and anything else you want to add. I don't think those two sessions or those two talks will take up the whole session, so maybe we could use some Q&A afterwards, or if anybody else has anything they'd like to share, please add it on to the end. Okay, I was going to just very briefly just start off. We had it's been a little bit of a while. We had the Jenkins World last week in San Francisco, which was fabulous as always. It was really great. There was there was certainly a different vibe, I'd say, from the previous year, where the influence of Kubernetes and cloud is actually really growing. Just hallways, just in the hallways, and people talking about namespaces and pods and various other Kubernetes things. It's, this is just in passing, and it's really, I think from Jenkins, from CI/CD focused conference, it's really starting to attract, that those users from the Kubernetes ecosystem, people using Kubernetes as well. There's a few talks. James was also up on stage. James Strachan was up on stage and doing the Continuous Delivery Summit keynote, which is great. I think those videos are online. We'll check if they're on the website. If not, we'll add them on. We just talked about some of the exciting stuff we've been doing and what's happened so far as well, which is really great. We also did I did a talk as well. One was recorded, but most people here would have seen it already. It's a similar thing with Tecton. But we did another one, me and James, which wasn't recorded, unfortunately, but we actually showed automated TLS live on stage, actually going off to Let's Encrypt and actually issuing them. It's a real signed certificate whilst up on stage, and actually went green in the browser. Actually there, and there was a big cheer, which is kind of nice. So yeah, hopefully we're going to get those. We can get maybe some more polished demos around some of this and better docs to help people use this and understand what's going on there. That's probably enough babbling for me. Hey Dennis, did you want to talk to us about a little bit about what's going on with the website as well with Oscar?
Yep, for sure. So good segue with the docs stuff. I've been allowed to focus all my time on really just getting the docs better. So that's kind of the overarching sort of focus for me for the next while. So initially, Oscar and I have been looking at sort of restructuring, looking at what we have now in terms of content, and trying to see if we could structure slightly differently. So the main focus has really been trying to split it into more sort of, I wouldn't say obvious, but sort of more easily to access categories. So more around how you use it versus how you manage it and all that stuff. So I've raised the tickets 5157 with a bunch of suggestions. There's a spreadsheet in there with lots of details if you want to go there. It would be great to get some feedback on the structure. Hope it makes sense to other people than just Oscar and myself. The other stuff so the other thing that we've created is a project in GitHub for tracking doc stuff. So right now there's only 2 tickets in there, but we'll add more tickets for once we find the stuff that needs to be changed or fixed or expanded on. So hopefully we'll get a good backlog of doc specific stuff that anyone can pitch in and start solving. And I'm also working on some tooling to make things a bit easier. So we pushed a small update yesterday to just Dockerize the Hugo server and everything, so you don't have to have stuff installed locally, which is kind of nice. And I'm just wrapping up tooling around link checking and stuff like that. And we'll hopefully do spell checking and other stuff because my grammar is not the best. So hopefully I can get some help there. And there's a ticket to track some of those things, which is 5163. So yeah, jump in there. Feel free to help out. we'll probably ask lots of questions when we get closer. Oscar, you want to
Yep.
jump in?
Yeah, I think that what we are trying to do, like you said, is more specifically right now we're looking at restructuring the content that exists there and leveraging the Hugo tags so that we can make sure our users know if a feature or a content on a given page is something that's more experimental. So we'll be able to do that. We'll render that status via the tag and all that. We got a lot of work, but essentially, you know, as Dennis says, what we'll be doing is giving you a navigation menu that makes sense, right? From the administrative perspective of Jenkins X and as a developer. So two different audiences get different content and whatnot. And of course, we'll have FAQs. We are making sure that the taxonomies in the Hugo site are leveraged so that the search becomes more powerful. Right now, to be honest, it's not there, and we understand that. So this initial update will include those things that to us are more important for you as the end user. And then we're looking at potentially doing a little facelift across the entire site, not just the homepage, which would be potentially using another Docs Hugo theme. Would just be much, much cleaner. But our focus right now is just to make it easier for you to find information for you as the audience. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
I put a link on the project, by the way, on the chat. The GitHub project that Dennis mentioned is public, so you can keep up to date. I'll also mention that on our upcoming newsletter for folks to have that link readily available.
Yeah, and a good point on the experimental tagging. There's also a suggestion in there to help sort of define kind of 3 different levels. We can chat about working and everything else, but some way to say that, okay, this is experimental, like this might be risky, there's something that's more stable, or there's something that's rock solid, production ready, go for it.
Right. Right.
And so in the spreadsheet, there's even a column for like saying for specific docs articles that, hey, this is about an experimental feature or production feature. So if you go in there and have a look, it would be awesome if you could have a look at that column and just pitch in on that.
That sounds really great. I guess what things like with the CLI, for example, what G-Cloud do, they have nice, you can enable like alpha, beta, you know, that's what they, and that's the level to use, I guess they define theirs as, but yeah, no, I think that sounds absolutely awesome. I'm just going to share my screen because I think there was a couple of, I know Oscar, you dropped a link, but this is really good. I'm just looking at one of those issues that you mentioned, Dennis. So yeah, there's some links in there. So yeah, I really encourage anybody to have a take a quick look at this. It's really going to help because there's going to be some time when people are looking at this. So any feedback people have, they can really incorporate that and it'd be really beneficial.
Yep.
Also, and I even saw the new. Oh yes, we had that before, didn't we? The new. This is looking good as well.
Yeah. We revamped the homepage only for you know, showing it off at the Jenkins World, and it turned out to be quite nice. It's responsive. It uses all the same bells and whistles like Bootstrap and stuff. So eventually we'll do the same for the entire site, as I mentioned.
Does anybody have any initial thoughts around the website? How it's been? What could be improved? If they've got anything to share now, or they can drop on the issue. But
I think we need some Vault documentation.
Right. Yes. We've been doing, I think, initially installation, but also using Vault, as well as things like in disaster recovery, how we might recover a bucket, for example, you know, secrets from a bucket as well. Is that something? I know who's on the call here. Cosme, you're around. Is that something that's on your radar, or is that something that other people have been looking to pick up? Do you know any more about
that? Yeah, I think we need to do small improvements in the boot to make the stuff, let's say, more easy to recover in general. And then, yes, we should document that, definitely. Yeah. There is one issue to improve the boot config that we can provide Vault and its, let's say, associated resources like Bucket and KMS keyring in the config so that you can use it. And then I guess we should document how you recover, let's say, a deleted cluster or something, and how you recover secrets, definitely.
And I guess we could do some examples of how we're doing inlining the vault into a values YAML. So a vault URL goes to the path of where the secret is stored in vault.
Yes.
Really examples and quick starts.
Yes, and also another issue is to document like for documentation I open is to document all the secrets we have involved when we do a boot. We have a bunch of secrets which are placed on different paths that we know exactly for what they are used. And in case you want to rotate them or whatever one, I don't know. So it would be also helpful to document each secret, what's its scope.
So where is this work being tracked? Sorry, it probably is an issue already.
There are issues, yes, for this.
Okay, maybe we can double check. I guess they'll probably have a kind vault, maybe.
Yeah, vault, exactly.
Yeah. So one thing I'm thinking with the docs project is to keep an eye on issues that we mark with docs needed or area docs, and then hopefully we can pull that in and schedule that, right? So Vault is definitely one of the big gaps that we have in terms of docs. Unfortunately, there's quite a few others. So we'll that's the hope that once we get the new structure in place, we'll start looking at where are the gaps and then start raising tickets on it and start working through it. I think there's some documentation internally in CloudBees for Vault for the distribution that we should be able to borrow or get.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, we're following this issue on the repo, right? So as per Peter's suggestion, just to reiterate, we will create issues for the area docs for the stuff we're doing. So at any given point, anyone can have a roll up in that project that we created to see all of the stuff that's being worked on related to documentation.
Okay, great stuff. On that note as well about saying needs docs, Pete, I wonder if we should. There was talk before about some review guidelines. Was there anything on there to say, you know, for big changes, maybe we should try and start ensuring or adding a label saying needs docs before it actually gets merged into JX. So if there's a big feature, say, that gets added, we can actually ensure that there are sufficient documents on the website being produced. Do you think it's worth it?
Yep. Yeah, we did talk about that. I'm just trying to see what we ended up with.
Yeah. Maybe something we can follow up with.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Well, seeing as though you're on the screen, did you want to talk to us a little bit about the CLI?
Sure. Let me share my screen. I put some links in the agenda Google Doc as well. Right. What do I need? Here we are. So we talked a little bit about this on the last office hours as well. But I think one of the, as we do the triage and we look through what people are saying, I think sometimes you can see that there are, just like Terry just raised with Vault documentation, there are areas where there are perhaps improvements we need to do, and maybe rather than trying to address them all piece by piece, instead we wanted to, for this at least, we felt there was a good reason to take kind of a more holistic view of it. So one of the things we've done over the last few weeks is try and collect a list of all the problems that we are aware of in the CLI tool. So by that we really mean the JX command. And we've really collected these in this doc, and we've really got 4 buckets, I think. So stuff around user experience, stuff around quality, stuff around the source code, the development experience of building it, and then some stuff around user behavior. And really with user behavior, I think this is more of a forward-looking problem in that we don't, or it's a problem when we come to look at things like this. We don't really know how people are using the tool, and so we don't know where to focus our efforts. If we look at the source code, a lot of it is around trying to improve the structure of the source code so that we can be more effective and more efficient when we are building the JX commands, and introduce less UX problems, less quality problems as we go. With quality, a lot of it's around having things that don't work, paths that don't work through the code, and trying to reduce those down to be as small as possible, ideally none. And then with the UX, a lot of it is around consistency. CLI is inconsistent in places, and then also structural problems. So it's perhaps not always, for me, one of the key things around perhaps one of the key words here for me is it needs to be more intuitive. And for me, I think to make something more intuitive, one of the things you want to look at is consistency, and another is structure, to make sure that it feels like a good thing to use. So we've identified that set of problems. This document is open for comment. So, if there are other problems that other people want to add, it's definitely not too late. Please do go into the doc and add comments. So I've also been working on kind of a proposed solution to this. So I'll go back to the tasks. That's probably the last thing to look at, but I'll talk a little bit about the measure of success. And so this, I guess, is primarily around some of the source code refactoring that we want to do, but really we wanted to make sure we had a measure of success so we can look back and say whether we were successful or not with this. And in order to do that, the idea is what we want to do is keep a record of how much time we spend doing this refactor, and then evaluate how long it takes us to actually see a benefit from it. How long do we think it's going to take us to get to the point where we are actually seeing our development time significantly reduce. And then the other thing I did was write up what I've called an envisioned future, but this is kind of like basically when we get there, what's it going to look like? What improvements will we actually see? So we've got some stuff around it being intuitive, lots of stuff around, like around consistency, and making it really obvious what commands are to be run by the user, what commands are more useful inside a pipeline. Making sure we're exposing the right options, making sure that it's really obvious that when you execute a command, it's going to result in deprecated or experimental code being run. And that doesn't just mean inside that command that you initially run. It means that, if I did a JX import quick start, JX create quick start, and the promotion of that quick start to the production environment from the staging environment was going to use some kind of deprecated feature, it should tell me when I create the quick start. It shouldn't be just about the code it's going to execute now. It should be about what that code does in the whole system. Making sure we're outputting information to the user consistently. So that's pretty inconsistent right now across the tool, and certainly like the way in which information is output is pretty inconsistent in terms of the language used, the level of output, etc. The CLI right now is not really usable when you're not connected to a cluster, so trying to make those commands that are usable outside of being connected to a cluster usable when you're not connected to a cluster, and when you do need to be connected to a cluster, making sure that you're failing with a useful error message. What else we got? So this is a big one, I think, and this is maybe a larger one, which is that right now the CLI does a mix of things. It changes configuration and it changes CIDs and things like that, but it also sometimes actually directly affects the running state of the cluster. And so here the goal would be that the CLI, when run locally, can only affect the configuration of the cluster. It can't actually directly manipulate the state of the cluster. Commands have tests. What else? And then another big one would be around modularity. So right now, this is very kind of important for people developing Jenkins X, right? Is that right now all of the commands and all of the logic are kind of all mixed up together. So providing a strong separation between the commands and the logic, that will enable us to do better testing of the services and also allow us to reuse those services that we've built outside of the JX CLI. So take, for example, the Git providers. We have a big library that allows us to interact with all the different Git providers. That's really useful, whether you're building Jenkins X or whether you're building other tools to go with Jenkins X, it'll be great to be able to use those as a standalone feature rather than having to work out how to import them just that bit of the Jenkins X code base. Better use of interfaces, better use of API, making it really clear what the API is. Modularity I talked about. Writing tests should be really easy. So as much as possible, we should be able to focus on declarative tests. So with the CLI, for example, rather than having to worry about how do you test whether two different options are going to fail fast. So, we can specify, we saw this today in a bug, right? So you can very easily, with your cluster install, you can say, I want to use GitHub Enterprise and I want to use an on-premise, bring my own Kubernetes cluster. And I want to do that with Prowl. Oh, sorry, it was using Prowl and GitHub Enterprise, right? The install today allows you to do that. It doesn't error. It produces you a cluster. The cluster just doesn't work. So it'd be much better if the install would say, sorry, that's an invalid option up front. And what we want to do is make it really easy for people to write tests to validate that it does actually error up front. It doesn't go all the way through and create a cluster. And so you should just be able to have a matrix of different options, and you should be able to say, yes, these are valid together, and no, these aren't. And that can generate a test suite and validate that the commands actually error. So that would be a good example of maybe where we can be more intelligent around the way we do the framework for the tests in order to validate a bit more. I think the other thing we want to focus on as part of the modularity is if we can split the logic and the commands a bit more. We can have one area that's focusing on validating that the commands work, that the options work together, and one area that's focusing on validating that the logic we're running is correct and is doing the right thing. And I think that will also make testing considerably easier when we're not having to worry about, is it the CLI that's erroring, is it the options that are erroring, or is it the logic that is erroring? And then the other thing I think I should have mentioned earlier on around the modularity and the isolation would be that right now I think the way Jenkins X asks questions as it goes through the kind of what we call wizards as you go through the CLI are really useful, right? They guide the user towards an end goal. But one of the challenges we've got right now is it will ask some questions, it will run some code, it will ask some more questions, it will run some more code, it will ask a few more questions, it will run a bit more code, which isn't great from a kind of like failing fast perspective. So I think one of the things we'd like to do as part of this is say all the questions should be asked wherever possible up front. We collect all the answers and then we execute the logic. And that feels a lot more like the way a CLI should work to me, because with a CLI you can also put all your arguments in on the command line. So really all the questions are doing is basically filling in the missing command line arguments and then executing the logic. And I think that structure will make it much easier for developers not to miss questions or not to miss arguments when they're building the CLI.
Really like that idea, because I know there was also other bits of work. Mark Cox was doing this as well around being able to override certain questions to answers with environment variables, and
right.
We've kind of also done it with the YAML file with JX requirements as well. It does feel like that's a much better way to do things, where you can do that validation, as you said, between the different flags and different options. You can provide better feedback and responsive and useful feedback to users.
Yep. And so in this proposed model, the command is responsible for building up all of the arguments that are going to need to be passed to the back end. What I'm going to call the back end, or the back end logic, the logic. It's not really in the back end, it's still running inside the same process, but the actual logic that's going to execute. And then it passes all the arguments it needs, all the data it needs into the logic, and the logic executes. The logic should not be worrying about, do I have all the right information I need to complete? That's passed in, and the command itself is worrying about how do I get all the information in the right place. And I think just that separation of concerns can really help people when they're writing commands to think about, what am I doing? How am I collecting the information? And the other I think I would like to investigate is whether we can use the JSON schema stuff that I wrote for trying to do as many of the questions and answers as possible. Because if we do that, then we know that we have a whole battery of tests that validate that for a given schema, the right types of questions are asked. So then the user doesn't have to focus on validating that the questions are correct. They can actually, in their test, all they have to do is supply, these are the arguments that I want to evaluate in this logic, just go and evaluate it for me. And that takes away a whole area of complexity in our testing around answering questions that requires you to set up mock terminals and fake terminals and revert, change where standard in and standard out are going and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's some structural things we can do in the code base that will make testing more straightforward, basically.
How would we? Is there any thoughts about how? I guess it's still early days. Any thoughts about how this gets communicated to, say, to users? Because the CLI is the interface for users. That's our UX. That's our contract.
Yep.
So if things were going to, hopefully, we're going to try and do things in a. Are we going to try and do things in a backward compatible way?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I guess the main way would be through channels like this, office hours, and potentially, and various other approaches. Maybe we could even have a section each week, 10-minute section each office hours to try and give an update of things.
So one of the things I mentioned in there was, this is a good segue, so thank you, James. It's almost like I pre-briefed you on that. One of the things I mentioned in there is that we want to have a better way of highlighting to users what deprecators and experimental features are. And I think that, we've talked about this before. We've talked about deprecating stuff, and we never actually get around to deprecating it. We never actually get around to removing it. And I think that's partly because we're not convinced we've really told the right people. And by the right people, what I really mean is enough people, the people who are actually using the functionality. Because we talk to in office hours, and some people watch it, but there's lots of other people out there who aren't on Slack, who aren't in office hours. So for me, the key thing about deprecation is finding a way that really puts it in the face of everybody for a significant period of time, so they know it is going to be got rid of. So this is a good opportunity to bring up this, which is my flowchart, which is an attempt to kind of understand how all the different bits of work need to fit together. So in here, one of the first tasks I've identified is defining a deprecation policy. So defining what does it mean to deprecate? How long do we want to warn people for that we're going to be deprecating before we remove something? Then initially what we want to do is deprecate stuff in a way that I'm not really comfortable, which is just via the blog, via code, via command help, via office hours, etc., and then remove it. We just want to do that initially because we want to tidy up some of the code base. But having then built, I think over here somewhere, I can't remember where I've done it, somewhere, once we've actually built, here we are. So once we've actually built support for deprecation and experimental functionality into the CLI itself, so that when you run say you run a command like JX install and you choose Jenkins file runner, which I think is something we are all happy to say should be deprecated, it actually gives you a warning when you do the install. Or if you have a Jenkins file runner cluster already and you do an operation like JX get build logs, it gives you a warning at that point, right? Because not everybody who's using Jenkins file runner is going to be rerunning the install, right? Lots of people are just going to be using the cluster quite happily. So whenever you do any of these things that uses that cluster, it makes sure it tells you. Once we've got that, then I think at that point we then can start doing a much deeper restructure of the CLI, the UX of the CLI. And the reason I wanted to bring this diagram up is it shows clearly that one of the dependencies of starting to do heavy refactoring of the UX of the CLI is to make sure we've got that deprecation system in place.
That's fantastic. Hopefully that's provoked some thoughts and questions. Although I'm slightly worried about your battery, Pete. I saw your battery.
So am I. I have to go and find some power in a minute.
Does anybody have any questions around that? Kenny's countdown. So I'm assuming this is all going to happen really, really quickly, and next week this is all going to be done, right?
No. I think we're going to try and take this reasonably slowly. This is a big task, and I think it's something that, as we go, we want to make sure we're going in the right direction. I think the good thing about my flowchart was that the reason I did it like that was I'm not normally a diagram drawer really, but I started to try and write it, which is my natural way of communicating things, and I realized I just couldn't because there was actually so many parallel tasks that could be undertaken. So I think I want to leave this open for another week, basically, so that we can make sure that everybody's had a good chance to comment. I'm really aware it's the summer and lots of people are away. But once we've done that, I'll start creating some tasks in the JX issue tracker, and I'll try and represent like that first tier of parallelization that we can do as tasks. And then as those start to be completed, we can refer back to the diagram and find out what we can do next. I wouldn't envisage that we will reach that kind of future state for quite a long time. The goal is to get there. My goal would be to get there over time and prioritize the things that we think will help us get the next bits done faster, rather than trying to just go at it sort of fast, if that makes sense.
Agreed. Makes total sense. Well, before your battery does run out, there was a question. Now, we could go for it, but I think they've dropped, but they did want hoping it to be asked. It was from Nilesh, who was asking about how to delete all traces of an app deployed using JX. Is there a label or is there an approach? Is that something that we've heard before that we need? Are we able to do? Deploy all traces of an app?
Wouldn't the garbage collection take care of that if it's executed?
I guess it depends on what kind of an app, because actually I was initially assuming like a JX ad app, one of those, but this could be their own application. So they've actually gone. So this, yes, I know.
I suspect it was their own application. So for for the app framework, it's quite straightforward. You do JX delete app and it will be gone. But I think they were asking for their own application. So we do have the JX delete application command, but I know that doesn't. There are some open issues that we have in the issue tracker around that needing to be more complete in terms of what it removes.
And everything would be, because everything's a Helm chart, you have, an environment would have the requirements YAML and your application in there. It's whether or not sometimes Helm does make sure it does clean everything up when you delete things.
Right. I think the applications, they also have configuration in Brow. So when you remove it, you have to clean up Brow config. So the same way, like when you import an application. So currently we don't clean up Brow config, unfortunately. So we need to fix it.
Presumably Vault as well. So say you were to delete
also, yes.
We probably want to remove the secrets of it. Yeah.
And one area sorry.
I was just going to say, you'll also have pipeline activities and source repos and stuff like that in there now as well.
And Prowl config was the bug that we saw recently, was that JX Delete app didn't remove the Prowl config.
Let's get an issue up and try and, there was a few things that we all mentioned there, and we should try and get that, and then people can start working on that, because it's a good one to do. I'll create an issue and tag the people that spoke then, and we can try and put some thoughts in. Great question, Nilesh, if you're watching this back on the recording. Thank you. Okay. Pete, you shoot off. Mark Cox, what have you been working on today?
I've just been working on a couple of bug fixes for JX Boot.
Okay.
And I'm starting to look at the upgrade process for Boot as well.
Fabulous. Okay, so this will, that's really good. And I know that, a lot of people are looking forward to that one. So, okay, so we'll get some more information, I guess. Is there an issue tracked or something?
Yeah, there's an issue somewhere. There's a diagram that Pete helped me knock up.
Do you want to, if you pop the issue maybe on the developer Slack channel, just so in case anybody wants to follow, they can watch it, and then that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. Nice.
Caught Mark off guard there, just making sure everyone's on their toes. Does anybody else have something to share? I can actually introduce Michael. Michael, apologies if I pronounce your surname incorrectly, but I'm going to give it a go. Michael Halions. Yep. That was close enough. So I just wanted, if people don't know Michael, Michael works at Carby's, comes with some much needed SRE skills and is looking at how, as a focus from around observability around Jenkins X as well. So this is of course because we dog food everything with Jenkins X. We're building up our observability story, which Michael's leading from that point of view. So hopefully we're going to be having a lot to share, that a lot of people that are using and running Jenkins X can actually see what we're doing. Maybe hopefully we can share and collaborate on some of the things about how we observe and manage, monitor and alert around with Jenkins X. So yeah, just wanted everyone to know Michael, and yeah, we hopefully be seeing a lot more. Okay. Are there any questions that anybody has? It's 20 minutes left. Any questions from anybody?
So this is Oscar. I wanted to bring something up that's has been going on in our Slack channel, and I wanted to get people's thoughts. You know how now Cloudbees has the Jenkins distribution, and it looks like we're getting like questions there. Would you say that's the best place for folks to inquire on it?
That is a great question. Dennis and Dean, do you have an opinion on that one? I mean, it's open source, right? But I didn't know how. I haven't been involved in that side of things, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to point people in the right direction. Ultimately,
yes.
I think initially, yeah, the Slack channel is a good place. It's still open source. It's exactly the same code as Jenkins X. It's just like packaged slightly differently and at a slower cadence, right? The thing with the distribution is that if you want to pay for support and get Cloudbees support, you need to run the distribution. So those are kind of tied together. So if you want faster responses or something like that, there is the option to go through Cloudbees, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. Like it's the same code, right? So I think it makes sense to initially go to the Slack community.
Fantastic.
And I guess when raising issues, folks should make the distinction. Maybe we can update our template if it hasn't already been done. Yeah, that's a really good question. Oscar, from last week, how did you get any more feedback? Tell us about your workshops.
Oh yeah, so last week at Jenkins World, we had a fantastic turnout. You know, Victor Farsik and myself were leading a workshop 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, and a lot of questions. Folks really wanted to know. Two things that stood out to us were we brought up the Jenkins X distribution because folks in enterprise environments needed that control and stability. So we brought that up, and they loved the idea. The only thing that they wanted is the support for AWS. So we told them that's definitely on the priority list. It will be in 1 to 2 versions more. And so that really helped. People love the open source platform as is. We went through what I call very difficult task, right? And using EKS with the open source one, we had pre-configured cluster and stuff. So people executed all the commands and did quick starts. It was phenomenal. And the feedback we got was spot on, right? And we always look for that because we want to actually run the same workshops for Lisbon. If folks are going to Lisbon, then Victor and I will be doing the same workshop, enhancing it obviously, but with a lot more stuff now that, by then we'll have some great updates on the open source stuff. So we're excited.
Awesome. Yeah. So I actually bumped into a few people as well, and they really enjoyed the workshops that you and Victor ran as well. So hats off to you, Oscar and Victor, if you're listening back.
Oh, well, thank you. I think they loved the new shirts too. I had a couple of boxes full of the new shirts in white with the new logo, and we were raffling them, and people were completing tasks and then, rewarding them as they did something. It was just a very fun thing to do. People enjoyed it, right? It wasn't it wasn't really a quiet workshop. It was everyone was able to talk and bring up things that they felt comfortable, and that's what we're looking for, right? And it worked out nicely, you know.
Brilliant, great stuff. Okay, so anybody else have anything they wanted to share? Any thoughts? Anything really at all? Okay, well, in that case then, let's finish 15 minutes early. We'll have a catch up in and then people will probably be having lots more holidays and various other things. But I should imagine we'll have some. We're going to try and get some demos and some more visual activities on the next office hours. But thanks massively to Pete and Dennis and Oscar for the fabulous work. And yeah, speak to you all soon in the next one. Thanks all for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.